All right, during the last video, we talked a little bit about percentages and modeling percentages with those, remember those big grid boxes, things that had 100 boxes in them, and we shaded those in because we talked about how percentages were based off of 100. And we talked about how we could write them as a ratio, basically like the fraction, and things like that. And we're going to take that a step further, and we're going to look at percentages and how we would write them as a fraction, and then also how we write them as a decimal. Now this is something that's very important that you'll use quite a bit. So we're going to take it a little slow. We're going to talk about how to write them as fractions first because that's the easiest, and then we'll talk about how to write them as a decimal. Okay, and I'll give you a couple examples of how we do that and a couple of tips and tricks and things like that to help you make this a little easier on you. Okay, all right. So we're going to start with how to write a percentage as a fraction. And what makes this easy is that we know, and we talked about this in the last video, is that with a percentage, to make it into a fraction, since it's based on 100, we can take the number before the percentage sign, put it as the numerator on the top of a fraction, and then your denominator will be 100. Okay? And we're going to do some more of that today, but, and you're going to hate me for this, you're going to have to simplify your fractions into lowest terms. Yeah. Sorry. I know you love that, and you're super excited about that, but that's what you have to do. Okay? So, but don't worry, I'll walk you through it, and we'll get it done. All right, so let's look at the examples that I have for you. I've got a couple. One of them is 15%. One of them is 113%, and then 0.5%. Okay? And what we'll do with each of these examples is we'll first put them into fraction form. We'll do that for all three of them, and then come back, and then I'll show you how to put them into decimal form. Okay? All right. So let's get started. All right. 15%. And we had talked about in the last video of how percentages are based on 100. So as a fraction, we know that if we take this 15 and we put it as the numerator, the top number on the fraction, and since percentages are based out of 100, our denominator is going to be 100. Okay, now that would be great if that's all we did, but we have to simplify. Okay, put it in lowest terms, otherwise it's incorrect. Okay, so we need to do that. So we need to figure out a number that can go into both 15 and 100. Now the first one that comes into mind for me is 5. Okay, so I look at this and I think, okay, both 5 can go into both of those. And if I divide this one by 5 and divide this one by 5, because remember, whatever you do to the top, you have to do the bottom, and vice versa. So whatever you do to the bottom, you have to do to the top. Okay? So 15 divided by 5 is going to give me 3. 100 divided by 5 is going to give me 20. Okay? Now, I've got to make sure it's in lowest terms. So is there anything that can go into 3 and 20 evenly? No, there's not. Okay? Because 3 is a prime number and 20 is not a prime number. Okay? All right. So there's our answer. Okay, so we've got 15% taken care of. All right. Let's move on to 113%. Now this one is a little tricky because, like we talked about, percentages are based on 100, and we have more than 100. A little tough. Okay, now let's look at this in kind of like fraction thinking. If I have 100 out of 100, I have one whole. Okay, so one whole number. So since I have more than 100, okay, I could make this fraction like this. Okay, because percentages are based out of 100, and when I start putting them into fractions, my denominator is going to be 100. Okay? Well, since my numerator is bigger than my denominator, I know that this is an improper fraction. And changing this is the same as what you had done earlier with improper fractions earlier in the year. Okay? You look at this. You look at the denominator. And you see that, okay, if I have more than 100, I've got more than one whole thing. Okay? It's like if you get bonus points on a test. If you get like all the answers right, and then plus you got the bonus, which was worth 5 points, you get like 105%, which is awesome. But you got more than all of them right. Which if you think about it, it's really kind of weird, but so if you've got more than 100, that means you've got one whole. So you know that you've got one whole plus some more. Another way we can think about it is the way that we dealt with improper fractions. We took the denominator, we saw how many times the denominator can go into the numerator. So basically, you see you're dividing this by 100. Okay? So I take 113, divide it by 100. How many times will 100 go into 113? One time. I do my subtraction. That gives me 13. Okay, now normally in 6th grade, you don't like remainders, and you want to go ahead and add your decimal, bring your 0 down, do all that stuff. With fractions and with improper fractions, you don't do that, because the number up at the top, the 1, is your whole number. Your remainder is your numerator, and your denominator is the number you divided by, this one, the 100. Okay? Now, this and this are the same. Fraction form, percentage form. Okay? Remember, if you have more than 100%, you've got one whole. That's why we have the whole number. The remainder is how much is left over from your whole. It's your whole plus. It's like the bonus points on your test. If you got 13 bonus points, 13, and then of course it's based on 100. And also, just because it's now a mixed number, make sure that it is in simplest form, which this one is, because 13 is a prime number and 100 is not a prime number. Okay, 13 cannot go in evenly into 100, and nothing else can go into either of those to simplify it. Okay? Hope you're with me so far. All right, now let's go with this one. Now we're dealing with a combination of decimals and percentages. Okay? Kind of crazy, kind of nuts, I know. Okay? So what we have to do is we have to look at this. And what I like to do is I look at this and I read it 5/10 of a percentage. Okay? So I'm going to do like I did with the others. I'm going to take this and put it over 100. Okay, now you're looking at this and I know what you're thinking. You can't have a decimal inside a fraction. That's a big no-no, and you're absolutely right. But the reason I do this is to kind of help me a little bit know that I can't have that, first of all, and it helps me get it to where it needs to be as a fraction. And let me explain that. If I have 5/10 and I want to make it into a whole number, I can multiply it by 10. 5/10, 10, okay? So if I multiply that by 10, that's going to give me my whole number. Now remember, whatever I do to the top number, I have to do the bottom number. So I also multiply that by 10. That's going to give me 5/10 times 10 is going to give me the whole number 5. 10 times 100 is 1,000. Okay, that gives me my fraction. All right, now we're not done because we have to simplify. Okay, can 5 and 1,000, do they have a number that can go into both of them? Of course, since 1,000 is an even number, ends in a 0, of course, 5 can go into it. And we know 5 can go into itself. So we divide this by 5, divide this by 5, because remember, whatever you do to the top, you have to do the bottom. 5 divided by 5 is 1. 1,000 divided by 5 is going to be 200. and then that is our fraction. Okay? Now, the reason I did this is because if I look at this as a decimal, I know I can't have a decimal on top as the numerator in a fraction. And this is actually, since it's not a whole percentage, it's less than a percentage. Okay? So a whole percentage would be 1 over 100. And it's less than that. So that's why we have to do this. Okay? Hopefully that makes sense. If it doesn't make sense, then I can do another video explaining that a little bit later, get a little bit more in depth, because we're already at 10 minutes. Okay? So I'm going to wrap this video up so that this video doesn't end up being 20 minutes long, so that we know this is how we convert percentages into fractions. Okay? Remember, got to keep them in simplest form. All right? There'll be a part 2 of this video that will cover how to take these percentages and write them as decimals. All right?